Hello, welcome to PSR, People Speaking Rail. There is a lot going on in the railroad industry. Norfolk Southern getting grilled as we speak in Washington, D.C. I'm Mike Baudendistel, I'm head of Intermodal Solutions, work on the data side of the house here at FreightWaves, and I'm joined, as always, by Joanna Marsh, who works on the editorial side. Joanna, how are you doing today? And I want to say congratulations on being named one of the finalists for the Neal Award for Best Industry Coverage. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Good seeing you, Mike. I'm doing fine. So FreightWaves received several finalist nods. One of them being for the industry coverage for rail, mainly the industry coverage for the rail strike, or the potential of a rail strike, last November and December. And so it was several articles that were submitted as part of this industry coverage. A few by my colleagues, Clarissa Hawes and Rachel Premack, is kind of looking at different angles of the issues surrounding rail labor and railroad issues. For instance, Clarissa wrote, a really great piece, kind of more on the human interest side, looking at the dynamic between workers and the railroads. And then, of course, Rachel's coverage looked at just some of the other points that are sometimes overlooked in this dynamic between the rails and the unions. And then the piece I wrote, one of them was on how a rail strike could affect the trucking market, which was kind of interesting because I don't really delve into trucking coverage for trucking markets often. So it was kind of neat to talk to people about that, about an area that I'm not as familiar with. So
Yeah, and we did see some of that in our data, the FreightWaves sonar data.
Oh, yeah.
When some of those terminals were about to shut down, I think at one point it was within a day or so of a potential legal strike. They shut down certain container terminals from in-gating. I believe that was Norfolk Southern who did that. And then we saw pickup in truck volume out of those markets, a drop in the rail volume that was being in-gated in those markets. It was pretty clear from our data. It's one of the cool things about our data, sort of on a daily series. You can see on a day-to-day change sort of what happens. That was pretty interesting as well. I think we incorporated a lot of that data into your articles to sort of make it sort of across the organization. So I thought that was great. But so the Neal Awards, I guess one person described it at FreightWaves as being kind of like the prestigious award for B2B journalism, sort of like it is to B2B what Pulitzer is to that section of journalism. So I think it's a pretty good deal, and I just wanted to take a minute to recognize your work there.
Oh,
with
thanks.
that, I want to move on to the next topic. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no. I was just saying thanks. I mean, it's nice because just personally, like, you invest a lot of time and heart into these issues, and so it's just nice to see others being I don't say complimented, but being recognized, I guess, for that. But you are true in saying that that there was a lot of great data that came out of FreightWaves as well, in terms of how the potential rail strike might have affected things at the terminals and stuff. So.
Yeah, I think it shows also that we chase this sort of stories that are most impactful, that people care the most about. It's kind of like last year we focused a lot on the railroad strike, sick day issues, all of those things. Now we're really focusing on the railroad safety issues, and so you do sort of have to, go to the circus when the circus is in town, to so to speak. So I think we'll continue to do that. So with that, we'd like to go to the next topic. We had a great show last week with former Surface Transportation Board Chairman Daniel Elliott. He's a good guy to interview. I think we've both talked to him in the past. And did you have any sort of takeaways or things that you sort of remember that sort of stood out to you from that discussion?
Yeah. It's interesting, talking with him before as well in the past, like just the time that it takes for regulations to go through the Surface Transportation Board. I think it is one thing. I mean, reciprocal switching has been and is sort of a hot topic right now, but it's actually also been it's been around for, I don't know, I think 10 years or something like that, if not more. Because I think it was being discussed when Dan Elliott was on the board as well as chairman of the board, and so for it to take a while, and I think part of the reason why it disappeared was because uh, there were enough board members to actually to actually have a vote on the issue, because way back then there was a time when they weren't 5 board members, there were actually only 2, and so and so it's interesting to see, kind of looking at that long view, like what sort of challenges there are in terms of getting regulation across, if the regulation is needed. And I guess that's partly why you've had Congress looking at it too, in terms of not so much the timeline for regulation, but whether the STB should be given more authority in regulating, which could help them potentially to speed up that timeline. I'm not sure really, but it's just that's one thing that struck me. What were some of the things that struck you, Mike?
Yeah, I think that right now that he said the STB thinks it was pretty swamped with the CP KCS deal. That maybe some of these other things just sort of have to be on the back burner for right at the moment. I thought the structure of the STB, where he talked about, we all know the board members, who they are, and used to hearing from them. But he said they have this staff of about 140 people underneath the board members that are primarily lawyers that are reviewing the legality of all of these things, all these issues that they're bringing to light. And I guess I didn't fully appreciate how large of a sort of a full organization that it was, sort of the things that go on behind the scenes. I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, just the description, give a great description of just how long it can take to get a new regulation passed, between it being, reviewed, the comment period, maybe being challenged in courts, all of those things. I mean, you should go back and listen to it for the full description. So that stood out. And then, I thought he gave a great answer when I asked, what's really behind the railroad labor shortage. And it was really kind of this multi-pronged thing. I mean, you hear the unions say, well, it's all about how the workers are being treated. You hear the railroads say that it's just a function of a tight labor market. Everyone's having a hard time finding people. We heard from Daniel Elliott, so okay, maybe those things are true, but also it's been kind of this mind shift where people don't view it as being the great job that it used to be, where you're out on the road. It's not really, I think it used to be kind of a way to serve your country. And there's been maybe a mind shift in terms of priorities, people wanting to be home, and all the sort of the work rules that go into being on call all the time. So it's not just that it's long hours and long shifts; it's kind of uncertain hours. So I thought that was a great description of why we do have this labor shortage, which is ultimately seems to be at least a large contributor to why there have been these rail service issues.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that is sort of an interesting point. And I was talking to a source, like, for another article several months ago, and just we were talking about how there's been the potential that you kind of think about the next generation of railroaders, and where is that next generation coming from, and as you mentioned, you have all of these issues surrounding about, like, how life is as a railroader in terms of the long hours, and how many days you have to work consecutively, and then of course you hear from the unions about concerns about sick leave policies and attendance policies, and so and benefits and other benefits. So it, it is kind of, yeah, I mean, kind of looking at it from a generational perspective, is is something I think this when the source and I were talking, it's something that hasn't really been it, it's been discussed, but then the discussion, it comes up and it gets put away, then it comes up and gets put away, and I don't know at this point if it's if it's sort of inevitable that maybe it's going on right now, that the discussion is happening in terms of like, where will you find the next generation of railroaders.
Moving on to our next topic, the hits keep coming for Norfolk Southern. So Norfolk Southern today in Washington, D.C., testifying before a Senate hearing. I'm sure a lot of this is taking years off of CEO Alan Shaw's life. Joanna, you wrote up an article on this. They're being scrutinized by NTSB and FRA. They're conducting an investigation of their safety culture. Some of the other things that have happened recently, Norfolk Southern conductor sustained fatal injuries in Cleveland. You talked about that being the fifth significant incident since December of 2021. There was a March 4th derailment in Springfield, Ohio. Seems like all these are things that seem to be happening in Ohio. And then you talked about a December 21 death of National Salvage and Service Corporation employee in Pennsylvania, who I guess was working on the railroad. Maybe that was at a contractor in that case, I guess. So what's interesting is, all these things seem to be happening in Norfolk Southern. Just earlier today, we had on FreightWaves Now, Tony Hatch, independent railroad analyst that we both know. And some of the things that he said was that Norfolk Southern is one of the safest railroads in the world, and talked about this as sort of being that they kind of drew the bad card, and they're one of the safest railroads. And it was unfortunate that this incident happened to that particular railroad. Also, stressed the railroads do have to haul these hazardous materials that they would rather not haul. But nevertheless, Norfolk Southern is going to be in front of Senate today. Undoubtedly will be grilled by politicians trying to make themselves look good. What do you make of all this from writing some of your articles about the Norfolk Southern safety culture? Seems like there's some difference of opinion there.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, on one hand, well, I guess a few things. One is it's interesting that the NTSB put out that safety announcement, or that investigation. They're saying that they would be looking into Norfolk Southern's safety culture, just because I was talking to another source about it, and just how usually the NTSB focuses on a specific accident, or as a response to that, but to look at the operational practices of one company is a little bit different. So that's kind of striking in itself. The FRA report announcement came after NTSB has said that, and that was that in my personal opinion felt a little different, just because it seemed to sort of follow on the momentum of FRA and the Department of Transportation, in terms of like trying to look like they're responding to rail safety concerns. So you have that one piece, and then you have another question of why, I guess related to that, why is NTSB doing that, and has there been something that might well, obviously you would say so. That would warrant them to actually, conduct this look in the first place. So that'll be interesting to see like what results come out. But yeah, I listened to that roundtable as well of Tony Hatch, and my personal opinion is I kind of feel that Norfolk Southern's kind of, I don't say the scapegoat, but it seems to be the company that is getting flogged, and it's as a warning to the other Class 1 railroads, like you better watch out, because if you act like Norfolk Southern, this is what's going to happen to you. But I don't know, especially. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting, and this was, I watched part of the Senate hearing. I have to finish listening to it, but like how how the senators were remarking, well, this is a bipartisan move. We have senators, or we have Republicans and Democrats kind of going against NS, and they're kind of talking about how much money NS and the other Class 1 railroads make. And so there's um, there was kind of related to this. I mean, there was an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal uh, last week, and I think you've mentioned this as well too, Mike, in a past FreightWaves Now, but just how with this accident, even though Norfolk Southern is getting the attention and the blame for this, there are so many other companies involved in this. Like the Wall Street Journal article is mentioning how the rail car was touched by, at least three or four other companies before it got to Ohio. So, it originated, I think in Texas, but it was touched by Union Pacific, and then it went through two short lines before it reached NS. And so you have, you have other railroads involved in transporting that rail car. You also have the rail car manufacturer, the rail car lessors, with GATX reportedly being the owner of that rail car, and of course you have the shippers involved too. And so it's interesting how NS is getting the brunt of this attention, but there are actually other players involved. And I guess if you look at the rail industry's response, they're trying to show, I don't know whether they're successful, but they're trying to show that there are other stakeholders involved in this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it seems like, based on what we know, the car was owned by GATX. It was manufactured by Trinity Industries. I mean, and I think that NTSB is looking at all things, including, was there a manufacturing defect? Was the car properly maintained? And, who was responsible for properly maintaining that car? I mean, I think, most of these cars, there's a set maintenance schedule. I mean, after every certain period of time, the car has to come out of service and be maintained. So they're looking at all of those things, but then, also there's sort of the regular maintenance. So there is still a lot to unpack there. I wanted to ask you about this one that Norfolk Southern conductor sustained fatal injuries in Cleveland. Yeah, I've heard of deaths happening in the railroad industry. I mean, it's the type of thing where you have to do everything right. Otherwise something like that can happen because the equipment is, hundreds of thousands of pounds. I mean, how often does that happen? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I don't know. I should have. I should. I'll try to. I need to round up the statistics for deaths that happen. But when I was looking at the data recently from the FRA, I did this story recently about looking at the train accident data, and even though I didn't include deaths in the story, I did look at that number. And although unfortunately I don't know it off the top of my head, but I didn't really see any trend one way or the other in terms of fatalities that have occurred in the last 10 years. So, obviously it fluctuates quite a bit. And I think, I don't want to generalize and sort of say this is it, but I feel like a lot of the incidents that I've read about have, obviously, taking place like at a yard or something. And so, but this unfortunate incident that happened earlier this week too at the customer yard in Cleveland is that, a dump truck was involved. And so I'm not sure, NTSB is looking at that as well, but I'm not sure who was at fault or exactly what else was involved in the situation. So
yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that and see what comes out of the hearings today. Another thing that's come out here recently, moving on to the next topic here, is that the AAR, Association of American Railroads, has outlined new safety actions, and so these are voluntary, actions. And this comes, Rachel Premack earlier today put out an article on that there's no federal safety regulations for these key railroad sensors. She's talking about the hot box detectors. And, one of the things that came out of that NTSB, press release was that, the railroads have their own standards for when a car is too hot and therefore needs to be pulled out of service. And the AAR sort of preempts any, regulation that would sort of come out and mandate some kind of standards. They're sort of saying, well, we'll make our own safety standards. So I can talk a little bit about some of the things that the AAR has outlined. So for these detectors, hot box detectors, they're saying that goal is of achieving no more than 15 miles of spacing. Currently, it's about 40 miles of spacing. Currently, AAR said this would cost $150 million for the industry. That's nothing. I mean, capital envelopes are in the billions of dollars. There would be 1,000 new detectors. There's currently about 6,000 detectors, so about 6,000 to 7,000 detectors. And then a new industry standard for when these inspections take place, where now the railroad must stop and inspect the rail car if it is 170 degrees above ambient temperature, which it sounds extremely hot, but ordinarily it can go up to that that amount without it really being a problem. And you sort of put that in the context of what we know about the Norfolk Southern derailment, East Palestine, Ohio, at least as of now. Based on the NTSB's preliminary report, it passed through three detectors. The one that's, let's say, 30 miles from ground zero, the car was only 38 degrees above ambient. I mean, we're assuming that the detector was doing its job and working properly. The one that was 20 miles out, it was 103 degrees above ambient. So basically, according to the hotbox, in East Palestine, Ohio, 20 miles away, there was nothing wrong. And then the one that, right at the derailment is 253 degrees above ambient. So, even if, the new rules for having the hotbox every 15 miles would have been in place, I doubt that it would have caught that, rail car being too hot, because it didn't seem like it was too hot 15 miles away from the site. So that's one thing that I would highlight. And then, Norfolk Southern's standard was already at the 170 to 200 range, is to stop and inspect the rail car. AAR saying now it should it should be stopped for the whole industry. And I guess Norfolk Southern had one of the stricter standards there for when the car the train has to stop and the car has to be inspected. Sort of that 170 to 200 degree range above ambient is stop and inspect, according to Norfolk Southern's standard, and then above 200 degrees above ambient, considered critical. They absolutely have to set out the car immediately. So, I'm not sure that those regulations in place would have prevented this accident in East Palestine, Ohio. I think the real mystery for me is just how quickly that rail car heated up in such a short number of miles, and I don't know that we have a good answer on that. To my understanding, do you have any idea?
Yeah, they haven't really released those kinds of details, and so I think that's just something that everyone's waiting for. I mean, of course, you'll have people in the industry kind of giving their own thoughts about what might have happened, or what what could have been done to prevent things. I think, I thought one of the interesting pieces in AAR's recommendations was kind of the use of data. I've been talking with a source about hot box detectors and the data that they record. And he was kind of suggesting that there hasn't really been a push within the industry to use that data and see if it can show potential trends about potential accidents, like in real time, which I think is what AAR brings up in one of their
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
one of their points. So
Yeah, I think that's true. And a couple other things that they mentioned, and they're talking about how, maybe potential improvements to tank cars. I mean, that always seems to be something that gets brought up whenever there's one of these type of derailments, sort of make the tank cars more crash worthy. But you do wonder, is that even possible if the trains are running as fast as they are on certain of these corridors where they're actually going 60 miles an hour, and they weren't going 60 miles an hour in that East Palestine, corridor. What was it? A little bit lower than 40, I think in the high 30s, if I recall. But that always seems to get brought up, and they're talking about having these Class 1s are going to train 20,000 first responders, and then the Class 1s agreeing to the FRA voluntary, confidential, close call reporting system. So they'll share some information, and then sort of a new app to share information. And so it seems like it's a lot of little things, but it wouldn't surprise me if there is federal regulation on top of those things, because this has gotten to be such a political issue.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that there is probably something that's going to come out, but it'll be interesting to see what exactly comes out, because you have that bill in the Senate right now that's calling for several. It's like the Rail Safety Act or something like that. But there's several measures in there that some will say all those measures address what to address preventing accidents, and some will say these some of these measures really have nothing to do with the East Palestine derailment, such as like the train crew size, and whether to require trains to have at least a train conductor and an engineer in the locomotive cab, or two crew members on the cab. So that's in the bill, and you have people in the industry saying that doesn't really have to do with East Palestine, but then as I said, you have others saying, well, it's part of the broader rail safety reforms that are needed. So, but yes, it'll be interesting to see what comes out, especially since, like, on one hand, you have this being a bipartisan, there's a lot of bipartisan action, but on the other hand, I don't know how long it'll take for actual regulation to get passed. I don't know.
Yeah, so a lot to work on there. Hopefully, you can leverage that into another Neil Award for the this time next year, working on rail safety. So where can people find your FreightWaves Rail newsletter?
Yeah, so there should be a link in my articles. I have a link that lets you subscribe to the Rail newsletter, but also all the other newsletters that FreightWaves produces, so including yours. So on consumer packaged goods.
Great, sounds good. That's all the time we have for today. Hope everyone has a great day.